right, welcome back, everyone. Good to see you all here. Now, there's some big stories to go into tonight. We're going to be talking about how they're pretty much criticizing critical race theories, something that really is dividing the country. Mike Pompeo had some interesting comments on this. We're also going to go on what's happening across the U.S., where you have people actually pushing back against it now. Now, who of you remembers, you might have heard it here first, that critical race theory may violate both the 14th Amendment because it engages in discrimination, right? Segregation, ironically, and against the Civil Rights Act, because again, discrimination based on a person's race is the real definition of racism, no matter how they try to tell you it's not, folks, right? It's racist. It's racist, and it engages in segregation. And frankly, folks, we talked about that here first. It may violate these two systems, right? Both the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act. And guess what? There are now people suing them based on these 2 points because they know it is illegal in America, especially if the government's pushing it. Now, we're going to go into that, a few other stories, folks. And as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Around the 30-minute mark, we'll try to get to them. Now, a lot to go into tonight. So we'll start real quick. The documentary we just did, America Rewritten, is now available. You can find it on epochtv.com/crossroads. Please check it out. And if you like it, please share it far and wide. I believe there's history in that documentary that most people are totally unaware of. But in terms of what this country is and why it should be kept, I think it touches on a really important points that are very useful to know. So please check it out. And if you like it, please do share it with everybody you possibly can, because it's really going to be grassroots making that possible, folks. All right. That said, let's jump in the first stories for the night. Real quick, though. Yeah, good to see you all here. Yeah. Meow Jia Sen, he said, CRT is racist. Yes, it is. That's critical race theory. It's racist. It is by definition of racist. Delisha G, so the documentary is amazing. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Let's see, folks. Sheila Marie, thank you, Josh. Great news. Elizabeth Valenzuela, hello, Josh. Yeah, folks, good to see you all here as always, and thanks for being here. All right, let's jump into the first stories for the night. So first up, let's talk about what's happening with Mike Pompeo, because he has some interesting comments. Epoch Times reports, Mike Pompeo on critical race theory and 1619 project. He's saying they're an attempt to divide the country. It says here, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has weighed in on the national debate over the teaching of critical race theory and the New York Times' 1619 project, warning of what he called an attack on these central understandings of a history shared by all Americans. Now, Pompeo, in a July 4th radio appearance on New York City's WABC 770 AM, was asked about his concerns and fears over America's future. He replied that while the nation has been resilient to threats, quote, some of the things that are being taught in our schools are what is particularly worrying him. And he said this, if we teach that somehow this founding of the United States of America was somehow flawed, it was corrupt, it was racist, that's really dangerous. He said he told us to the Cats Roundtable host, John Castimatidils. Sorry, I'm probably saying that wrong. And he said this, it strikes at the very foundation of our country. I certainly worry about that. It's called critical race theory, the 1619 project, but at the end, they're attacking these central understandings of what we have shared together for 245 years and attempt to divide the country. And that's what it is, folks. Now, ironically, it's being done under the narratives of tolerance, right? Fighting discrimination by using discrimination. You have to remember, folks, that the basis of this whole ideology, critical race theory, pulls from pretty radically left Marxist types, right? Critical race theory comes from critical theory, which is a Frankfurt School reinterpretation of Marxist oppressor versus the oppressed, right? Bourgeoisie against the proletariat, interpreting it within every single social dichotomy, whether it be race or family or religion or marriage, men and women, anything. That's critical race theory, or critical theory when you apply it to everything. Total nonsense, folks. But let's go into a few other stories with this. First of all, though, I want to talk real quick, folks. We're totally demonetized on YouTube, as you may notice. We no longer have our We no longer have the super chats. We no longer have advertisements. But we do have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. And big thanks to them. Now, again, with all the turbulence in the economy, literally multi-trillion dollars in spending, potentially even more multi-trillion dollars in spending, the issues we've been talking about, inflation on the horizon, actually now coming here. We're seeing rise in costs and everything. And the Chinese Communist Party waging currency war in the United States and many similar issues. Folks, you can consider investing in an asset that's often stable and typically on the incline. That is gold and silver. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep or into your IRA. And to learn more, you can check out the link in the description below. American Hartford Gold has provided us with a free 25-page information guide. So if you want to learn more about investing in gold or silver, check that out. And if you call them now, you can get up to $1,500 of free silver on all qualifying first orders. The number for that is 877-260-2764. You can also text Joshua to 65532. And also, so big thanks out again to them. Also, check it out. I got a few of them here. This is what the gold coins look like. This is a gold bar. These are some of the gold or silver coins, and this is actually one of the bigger bars of silver you can get. A small bar of silver, but has a nice weight to it. Again, folks, big thanks out to American Hartford Gold again for helping make this episode possible. Now, that said, let's jump into a few other stories. I want to talk more about what's happening with critical race theory and what they're teaching to kids in schools. A really important point, too, folks, we're going to have a great interview coming up really soon with a woman from Moms for Liberty. And what they've actually done, we'll have this announced soon. We'll show you the interview soon. And not in this episode, but future. What they've actually done is these moms went and got not just the books that are being shown to kids, but they actually got the teacher's guides that go along with the curriculum. And they went through the entire curriculum, well over 1,000 hours of work, went through every single book and compared how the teachers were, told under the teacher's guides, these curriculum, on how to present these works. And we go over this. We actually go over this in the episode. We go over some of these books and show what kids are being taught. And what are they being taught? They're being taught to, for example, look at a book that tells of, black kids being persecuted, during the civil rights era. And the teacher's guide specifically tells the kids to, quote, focus on the angry white faces, and then to ask the kids how they feel. These books are ideologically manipulating kids and emotionally agitating them, and specifically to make them so they hate themselves, they hate people of other races. You have kids they're intentionally traumatizing. In fact, they even talk about the need to traumatize kids with this stuff. You have kids that need therapy. You have little kids getting therapy because they feel that their grandparents are evil because of the color of their skin if the grandparents are white. You have kids literally who think that people in their own families should die because of the color of their skin, because of this type of education. And if you go through these education curriculum, they're not just talking about these divisive race policies, politics. They're also talking about things like cannibalism, suicide, really dark things. And so, folks, we're going to show you in an upcoming episode some of what they're actually teaching kids in schools. We're going to go over some of this curriculum. I think you'll really find it, concerning, but usefully concerning, right? There's useless concerning and there's useful concerning. I would say this is useful concerning because it's information you can actually use to do something about things with. Now, that said, let's talk about what's happening based on that. Because in Illinois right now, a teacher is suing the district claiming anti-racist curriculum is teaching whites oppress, that they're saying that teaching kids that whites oppress is a violation of the Constitution. Let's go into what's happening. It says, and this ties into what we've been talking about, how these actually may violate both the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act. It says here, a middle school drama teacher in Illinois has filed a lawsuit against her school district alleging that it is violating anti-discrimination laws and the U.S. Constitution through its curriculum that pits different racial groups against each other in the name of anti-racism, right? Racism in the name of anti-racism. And This is according to teacher Stacy Demar in her lawsuit, which was filed in the federal court on June 29th, and alleges that since 2017, teachers in Evanston-Stokey District 65 of Illinois, have been made to undergo so-called anti-racist training. And folks, if you're with a business or with an organization that has forced you in any way to go through these anti-racist trainings, pay attention to how this is happening, because there's a chance that you may have been discriminated against. And if you've been discriminated against, you can possibly sue them for that quote-unquote anti-racist discrimination policies they're doing with these things. And she says as well, they're continuing to do so. Now, DMAR is being represented by the Southeastern Legal Foundation. Among a number of objectives in the training, teachers are stereotyped by trainers and divided according to their race, the complaint says. You hear that, folks? The teachers are stereotyped and then divided according to their race. They're dividing people by their race. What do you call that? You call that segregation. Aren't we past the days of segregation? Technically, wasn't that made illegal under the Civil Rights Act? Yes, it was. So how is segregation being allowed to happen legally through public institutions like government, like public schools? Well, that's where these lawsuits are coming in. Now, with this, it adds that teachers were taught, get this, right? Teachers are required as part of the training to accept that white individuals are loud, authoritative, controlling, and other things, and to hold the view that to be less white is to be less racially oppressive. In other words, folks, to discriminate against people based on them being white and to form discriminatory narratives and labels based on the color of skin, they're claiming that doing so is fighting racism. Now, it's according to the lawsuit, of course. It added that teachers were taught to modify their viewpoints to fit the theory that white identity is inherently racist and to denounce white privilege. If teachers oppose, question, or disengage from the views promoted in the training, the district blatantly calls them racist, according to this suit. Now, on this, right, it says as well that students in the district, meanwhile, are then taught these concepts by the teachers who are mandated according to the curriculum of for pre-K, kindergarten, or preschool, through pre-K through 8th grade to impose the race-based viewpoint, a worldview on their students, a lawsuit adds. And as a result, students are expected to gather by race in affinity groups and to participate in privilege walks based on their skin color. Discrimination, folks, and segregation being used in our schools. Now, this is illegal. This is illegal under the Civil Rights Act. They're doing this in our schools illegally. Now, they're also given books depicting whiteness as the devil that messes endlessly with all fellow humans of color. Children were also taught whiteness is a bad deal. White people send overt and subliminal messages that they are superior and black people are bad, ugly, and inferior. This is what kids are being taught, according to this lawsuit. And that pretending not to see skin color helps racism, according to the complaint. Now, the lawsuit alleges these practices violate Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, as we've been discussing, and also violates the Equal Protection Guarantee. So keep that in mind, folks. If you are part of a company, if you're part of a business, if you're part of a government office, part of a school that is making you undergo trainings like this, note this, that it may violate Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and the Equal Protection Guarantee, as well as the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. You may have been discriminated against, and you may be able to sue them. Now, it says here, quote, fostering racial identities, promoting the idea that they are in conflict, and perpetuating divisive stereotypes, pits teachers against children, against one another based on the color of their skin, according to the lawsuit. And it says they teach them that their whole identity comes from the color of their skin. They teach them to hate each other. They teach them not only how to be racist, but that they should be racist. You hear that, folks? Alleging that this type of training, we can see it in practice because it does engage in racial stereotyping, discrimination, and segregation, things that normally we would always consider to be racist. It teaches kids to engage in this. And by doing so, they are being taught to hate. They are being taught how to be racist. They are being taught how to discriminate. They're being taught how to segregate. And this is being done under the very narrative that actually it represents, which is racism. This is a racist form of education, a discriminatory form of education, and something that engages in segregation that most of us might have thought was over in the civil rights era. Here, coming back again under the banner of the very thing it claims to oppose. Now, the school district did not immediately respond to a request for comment by the Epoch Times on that. But a few other things on this too, which is interesting. The teachers' unions are now trying to stop the backlash against this. The teachers' unions are trying to stop this. Not stop the education, but stop people like us from talking about it. In fact, some of the teachers' unions are even investigating people. They're looking into groups that, for example, challenge critical race theory and the types of things they're teaching. Now, let's go into one case of this, what's happening with it. It says here, America's largest teachers' union votes to help members, quote, fight back against anti-CRT rhetoric. It says here, the largest labor and teachers union has voted to spread and further the teachings of the quasi-Marxist race theory, critical race theory, which it describes as a reasonable and appropriate framework for students to understand and interpret America's past and present. The National Education Association, which is the one doing this, which represents more than 3 million employees in public education, on June 30th kicked off its 100th representative assembly, the National Teachers Assembly. During the 4-day online convention, the union adopted a measure that would commit at least $127,600 to advance its pro-CRT agenda, its pro-critical race theory agenda. And according to the plan, the NEA will share and publicize information about what CRT is and what it is not, dedicate a team of staffers to assist union members who want to learn more and fight back against anti-CRT rhetoric, and provide a study that critiques power and oppression in American society, including white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, which, folks, let's dig into what, they make up words. Cis is in people who aren't gay, hetero, which is repeating that for some weird reason, and patriarchy, meaning men. In other words, any man who is not gay is discriminated against based even on what these people are doing. And again, the broader view of white supremacy in terms of how they've broadly brushed this to pretty much include anything within that category. And capitalism. Why are they opposing capitalism if this is about race, right? Maybe, folks, it ties into what we've been talking about. If they want to go after white people, people who aren't gay, and capitalism, which is what they're targeting with this teachers union is targeting with this. If they want to go after these things, why is capitalism included? Do you know why? It's because they've redefined racism. We've talked about this before, so I won't go too deep into it. Racism used to be defined as discrimination based on a person's race or ethnic background. It still has that definition. Changing the meaning of language doesn't change its meaning. It just means that the books no longer have accurate depictions or accurate descriptions of what things actually are. That's the real definition of racism, including the legal definition of it. But if you were to read Merriam-Webster's dictionary right now, you'll see they've removed that definition and they've replaced it with a definition that says it's anything that leads to any kind of socio-economic system, like capitalism, that leads to unequal outcomes. In other words, the only solution to racism, according to the way they're framing it, is socialism. The only solution they're presenting to be able to solve the issue of racism, folks, is to implement socialism, to have equity, equal outcome, rather than, again, the ability to have your freedom. This is not about race. This is about remaking society. This is about remaking the socio-economic system, i.e. attacking capitalism and replacing it with socialism. That is really what this is about. And so when they talk about critical race theory and so on, and you see the school teachers unions actually pushing for it, note, folks, that they're actually talking about this in very subtle ways. Now, the union also declared that it opposes attempts to ban CRT, critical race theory, and the New York Times' highly controversial 1619 project, which was actually even called false by their own fact checker, which they ignored and published anyways. which recasts American history on the claim that the United States was founded and remains today a racist nation. If you want to see the counter arguments to that, please check out the documentary we've just released, which is America Rewritten. I think you'll very much enjoy it and find it very useful. Now, a little more on this. It says, in addition, the measure calls for an accurate and honest teaching of unpleasant aspects of American history and affirms that CRT is an appropriate framework for educators to address those topics. That's what's happening right now in American schools, folks. The teachers' unions are trying to fight back against it, but they're being sued. And so, again, I will note, folks, if you feel you've been a victim of racism, actual racism, if you feel you've been discriminated against, if you feel that you have been given these trainings and you've been forced to segregate yourself based on the color of your skin, if you've been criticized based on the color of your skin by your teachers' union or by any kind of organization, whether it be business or government, remember, folks, that you are protected against such discrimination by the Civil Rights Act and by the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and you have the full right to sue them. Remember that these policies represent the very thing they claim to oppose. Here, I would say that we are anti-racist. And being anti-racist means you oppose CRT, which is racist and which does engage in discrimination by its own admission, and which engages in segregation. The very things that are the hearts of racism is what it engages in. So go forth with this knowledge, folks. Now, that said, let's go over a few more stories, then I want to jump into some questions. So again, if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. I'll talk about what's happening with the Second Amendment. Now, there's a lot of battles right now over your rights to bear arms. I don't need to tell you this, but there's a lot going on, folks. Different people are trying to take away your rights to own firearms. In New York, for example, Governor Cuomo has declared a state of emergency over gun violence. I mean, ironically, after they freed all the prisoners from prison, and then when you have an uptick in violent crime, they blame it on the firearms, not on bad policies. This is the kind of thing where you have, ironically, areas with some of the tightest gun laws in the country being the areas where you have the highest murder rates in the country, like Chicago and so on. But rather than look at the policies that allow for these things to happen, or policies that have basically forced police to tie their hands behind their backs, they're going after your basic rights. One of these is, again, your rights to bear arms. Now, on this, there's a big push against this, and different states are joining together right now to try to protect the Second Amendment at the Supreme Court level. Let's go into what's happening with it. Epoch Times reports, says, Texas joins 21 other states asking Supreme Court to protect Second Amendment. It says, Texas has joined 21 other states in asking the Supreme Court to uphold Hawaiians' Second Amendment rights to bear arms following a ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals last year that upheld Hawaii's ban on residents bearing arms outside their homes. The states filed an amicus brief with the High Court to help resolve a split among the Federal Circuit Courts of Appeals after several of the courts ruled against the 2008 District of Columbia versus Heller case, a landmark gun rights ruling. It says, quote, one of the highest responsibilities of a state is to safeguard the rights of its citizens, Texas wrote in the brief last week, including the rights to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment. It says as well, continuing on this, law-abiding citizens keep firearms for self-protection, both inside and outside of their homes. Amici seeks to ensure that the residents will not be deprived of their Second Amendment freedoms. The states have argued that residents' Second Amendment rights include using guns outside of their homes. It says the plain text of the Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms, not just keep them. The court filing reads, and it says, yet Hawaii's firearm carrying regulatory regime functions as an outright ban on the right to carry guns outside of the home for most people. It therefore violates the Second Amendment. Now, we'll have to see what happens with this. There are actually several battles right now with gun rights at the Supreme Court, including, for example, high-capacity magazine bans. You have one case the Supreme Court is set to hear on whether you can have magazines that hold more than a few rounds. And you also have a case in the Supreme Court right now on whether it's legal for states to make it so you can't have concealed carries, because New York, it's very difficult to get one. You do have cases being heard on this by the Supreme Court. Maybe you'll take this one up too, folks. Love to see what happens with it. I'll keep you all updated on it. Now, we got time for one more story, and then I'll go into the questions for the night. Then we'll go to some other stuff. But I want to talk about what's happening with this investigation into the origin of the virus. Now, folks, you might remember last year, we published an investigative documentary looking into the origins of the virus, this new coronavirus, or the CCP virus. And in that investigation, we really found strong evidence that maybe it leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, at the very least. We found some very unethical research that was taking place at that Institute of Virology, this P4 laboratory, which also had millions of dollars invested in it from people who took many steps to cover up their support for the type of research that was happening there. You might remember the documentary we published. You also might remember it got deeply, deeply censored and deeply attacked. The weight of which we're still feeling. This channel is still totally demonetized, and we faced a lot of censorship and pressure and media attacks because of it. But it's turning out now that, well, everyone's kind of admitting to some extent that maybe we had it right, although they're not saying we had it right. They're saying, well, maybe it just came from a laboratory. But the house of cards is falling down, and as it happens now, one of the individuals who was involved with covering up the investigations into the lab leak theory just so happens to have very, very strong ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Let's talk about it. It says here, internal emails of Dr. Anthony Fauci, recently obtained by U.S. media through Freedoms of Information Act, have cast a spotlight on the long-standing relationship between an epidemiology professor at Columbia University and China. Now, this is a man named Walter Ian Lipkin, a Columbia professor known as a virus hunter for his long career in studying infectious diseases, wrote to Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, in May 2020. In May 2020, it appears to thank the official Fauci for publicly rejecting the possibility that the virus leaked from a lab. Now, Lipkin wrote this on May 5th, 2020. He said, "We deeply appreciate your efforts in steering and messaging." This is at page 706 of the emails, if anyone's following it. A day earlier, Fauci told National Geographic that the evidence strongly indicates the Chinese Communist Party virus, a pathogen that causes the disease COVID-19, quote, evolved in nature and then jumped species, and dismissed the lab leak theory. They still haven't told us what that species was, if they actually believe that, folks, because there's no evidence of it. But there is a lot of evidence pointing to the laboratory and pointing to the things happening there. Now, it's unclear who else the "we" in the message refers to, but as part of the email, Lipkin also forwards a May 5th email from CCP official Chen Zhu to the professor. And this CCP official, Chen, is currently the vice president of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, the regime's rubber-stamp legislature. He previously served as China's former Minister of Health from 2007 to 2013, and a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, a political advisory body from 2005 to 2013 also. Now, the entirety of Chen's message to Lipkin has been redacted under FOIA, so we actually don't know what they talked about, which means a government official somewhere, as they were releasing these documents, said, oh, this communication between literally the head of the CCP, or one of the heads of the CCP's Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, and this virus professor who was communicating with the guy in the U.S. who was writing our information, right, writing our findings about where the virus came from and censoring people, at least encouraging censorship of people saying otherwise, that you shouldn't see that, folks. Now, the entirety of their message, of their communication, has been redacted. We don't know what they said. But Lipkin went to China at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic to assist Beijing, the CCP, in its combat against local outbreaks. Upon his return to the United States, Lipkin became vocal in denouncing the possibility that the CCP virus originated from a laboratory leak at China's Wuhan Institute of Virology. A name that is going to live on in infamy, we could say at the very least. Now, I won't go over this whole story. It details a lot of his ties to the CCP, going back actually to around 2003. This individual has a lot of ties to the CCP. And in and of himself warrants, I think, serious investigation, especially if he was communicating with Fauci, and especially if his communications with Fauci were encouraging a type of censorship over information that may have actually been true, i.e., at the very least, legitimate public concern, i.e., the origin of the virus, and especially if China, right, covered up the leak from a laboratory, which, frankly, a lot of evidence suggests. Now, that said, folks, let's jump into some questions for the night, and then I'm going to go into a bit of what's happening with virus mutations and the vaccines, because, well, folks, the virus mutations taking place right now, it seems that some of the vaccines are not actually able to fix them or protect against them. You're being fed a lot of misinformation about the vaccines, it appears. And with that, we're going to go over a few stories on that. But first, let's go over some questions. And so if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Drink tonight, by the way, is just, again, good old-fashioned black tea and honey. Nothing special tonight, but it's quite pleasant. It's from Crazy Morp. He said, question. Since you did an episode with Roman, and folks, if you didn't see, I did a live Q&A with Roman Balmakov, the Epoch Times advertisement guy. He does a show called Facts Matter with us as well. Says, since you did an episode with Roman, can you do an episode with Larry Elder? I would love to. If Larry Elder, if you're watching, I'd totally get you on to co-host an episode with me. Maybe I'll propose it. You said, I think many here who don't know him would love him and like his opinion on race and truth. That's a great idea. I'll propose it. Actually, we do have a new system to do our shows, and we do have the ability to bring in guests, actually. And so we're actually going to be trying this out next week, as a matter of fact. We're going to have some specials around the release of this documentary, America Rewritten. If you haven't watched it yet, please check it out on Epoch TV. We're going to have some events with it, inviting some of the guests who were on that documentary to come on the show and speak with us. And so we can do a lot of cool stuff with this platform we haven't really used yet, but we're going to start using it. So stay tuned for that. Another question is from Judy Marshall. You said, question, Josh, where has Nancy Pelosi been lately? It's as if she has disappeared from the public's eye. You know, it's hard to say. I mean, she seems to have been around, but she's kind of keeping quiet, I think. Well, she's not keeping quiet. You know, Nancy Pelosi just formed this, this commission in the House of Representatives to investigate the January 6th, raid on the Capitol, quote unquote. When again they claim that Trump supporters, raided the Capitol building and ignored the fact that literally the police opened up the barriers and waved people in, and that the police waved people in and let them into the Capitol building while Trump was still giving a speech and while the majority of Trump's supporters were actually still watching him speak. The problem now, fine, if they want to investigate what happened, they want to investigate security issues or whatever else, fine. The problem you have, folks, is how does an aggrieved party be the ones who carry out the investigation? That's the challenge you have with that whole incident. Because the aggrieved party here is actually the officials who were, again, counting the Electoral College votes, including Nancy Pelosi and others. And these same people who were the aggrieved party in this, what they're trying to make into a criminal case, and some of them were minor criminal cases. The aggrieved party is the one trying to launch its own investigation. How does that ever work in a system of justice? How can an aggrieved party be unbiased? How can an aggrieved party ensure that justice is being served, blindly, right? Lady Justice wears the blindfold, folks. How can that possibly happen? Well, they're doing it anyway. Is the simple answer to that. It is moving through. We'll have to see what happens with it. But Nancy Pelosi seems to be busy on that currently. Next question, and then I'm going to, if you have, again, folks, you have questions, leave them in the chat. Next question is from Ron Keene. He said, Joshua, looking at the current events of the COVID-19 variants, do you see another lockdown around midterm elections? I'm personally seeing it coming. Your thoughts, please. So the Biden administration, and you may be hearing the noise about it, they're talking about this Delta variant. There's actually other variants, the Lambda variant as well. They're mainly talking about the Delta variant, this new variant that allegedly is more easily able to spread, and they claim is causing some countries to go on lockdown again. This Delta variant is the one causing a lot of trouble in Israel right now, because Israel, you had the majority of the country already vaccinated. In terms of percentage of populations vaccinated, Israel was leading the world. They were opening up, they were celebrating it. What happens, folks? Virus mutation, and then it happens that the vaccine apparently doesn't protect against it. They claim that it makes the, let's say, effects of the virus less severe, but they're on lockdown again. Despite all of that, despite the vaccinations, despite everything, they're on lockdown again. Now, the Biden administration, they're saying this new Delta variant is going to soon become the main variant here in the United States. They're saying on that they do not plan to again do lockdowns. They're not planning to do lockdowns, but they are doing some other stuff. The latest update on that is the Biden administration is going to have people go door to door trying to encourage people to get vaccinated. So you might get a knock at your door from a, I don't know, public servant of some kind asking you if you've been vaccinated. And we'll have to see whether it's an asking or trying to tell you to get vaccinated. We'll have to see what the process is for that. And also how states work together with the federal government on this or choose not to work with the federal government on it. And especially how businesses choose to get involved or not get involved. But again, the current state of this, they do not plan to have lockdowns, but they do plan to have a huge drive, including to the extent they want to have people literally go door to door, knocking on homes and asking if you're going to get vaccinated, or we don't know the extent to which, whether it's asking or telling, again, but they're going to be doing that. And we'll have to see how that goes into, again, the 2022 elections. If they do lock it down again, they might try to do the same thing as last time, where they use the lockdowns to change election laws across the country and use the lockdowns basically as a way to get things like universal mail-in ballots, no signature validations, and these types of things that caused a lot of the problems that are being investigated currently, including through the Maricopa County audit. And hopefully when the audit comes out and the findings of it are released publicly, we'll get a good idea of the actual effect of those changed policies that officials made using the narrative of the virus. Now let's go over a couple more questions. Then I want to show you a trailer of the documentary we just released. But let's go over a couple questions first. This is from Did We Get the Baby? He said, Josh, what happened in the depositions of the mother-daughter in Atlanta regarding election fraud investigations? To be honest, I haven't followed that case. I do remember the charges on that, if I remember right, but I haven't heard an update on it. It's possible I missed the story, but I don't think I heard an update on that. Again, I have been giving regular updates on the election investigations and where things are going. And folks, I will continue to keep you updated on that as I see things, and especially the big cases. This is from Shannon Haney. He said, Josh, have you heard about the Internet of Things mesh networks like Amazon Sidewalks? They will be connecting smart home devices via Bluetooth and passing traffic like Skynet from Terminator. I have heard about this, folks. It's what they call smart city technology. And yes, this will be the future if we allow it to happen. Pretty much they want, the Internet of Things, as you mentioned. They want to have everything connected to the Internet. The actual scary thing of this, have any of you heard of the Cloud Act? The Cloud Act. Heard of it? Any technology involving cloud technology, which is pretty much anything in the US, right? You have Amazon Web Services, you have Microsoft oftentimes offering some of the underlying code, even within open source programs and others. Anything that involves a signatory of the Cloud Act, which is most of these big companies, they've made it under the Cloud Act that any data passing through is monitored by the government, which in reality means, folks, that almost nothing is not monitored. Almost everything is monitored. They already have it. Look into the Cloud Act. It's already there. And as they begin rolling out these nationwide policies, if they try to do it, not even policies, just technologies, these systems are going to be built into it. And the violations of your privacy and so on are going to be built into it as well. You know, the issue we have in the United States is because the way the American system was established, we are a constitutional republic, which means that you have certain protections of your rights under the Bill of Rights, right? It's very hard for the government to get rid of those rights. It's very hard for them to violate those rights. Even if they control everything, it's very hard for them to get rid of them. But there's a loophole in it, which is businesses are not required to enforce those things. Businesses can violate your free speech. They can discriminate against you. Businesses, well, to an extent, businesses can choose to not allow someone in if they, are of a religious organization that don't want people who are not of that religious organization. This is why you can have private Christian schools, for example, right? If you run a website and there's an individual who goes in there and you're trying to talk about something important and they want to try to challenge you, you have the ability to moderate them and kick them out because you have that freedom, right? Freedom of speech. Businesses don't have to enforce it. The problem is, folks, that businesses in the US have become so massive and, well, around the world have become so massive to the extent that they're more wealthy than most countries. And they're able to control so much information and so much fundamental technology that they control basically everything. If you get deplatformed by, let's say, every major bank, if you get deplatformed by every major website, if you get deplatformed by, let's say, every private company, your freedom in society is actually extremely limited. It's going to be extremely limited. The irony of this is that it's actually a lot like what the Chinese Communist Party has under the social credit system. And yes, in China, it's done by the Communist Party, it's done by the government. But folks, here in the United States and, well, anywhere else in the world, because it's the same basic companies running the show, these same technologies exist in free countries, only they're run by private companies. Oftentimes, including in the United States, with some government assistance and with overlap of government programs. And so you do have this mesh, this overlapping between big government interest and big business interest. And big business has become a tool of these tyrants to push for these totalitarian policies in ways that they can really get around the Constitution and get around your rights. This is what they're doing. And the irony, too, is that a lot of these companies are just bootlickers, right? They will bend over backwards for the Chinese Communist Party. They'll engage in actual slavery in China while trying to, feed you all these narratives here about your history of oppression and so on, while they're doing the exact same thing right now as we speak in China. It's not about these issues. The issues are just vehicles through which they can attain their goals. The issues are merely a tool, right? Merely a narrative that mean nothing to them because they obviously violate them. They obviously practice the very things they claim to oppose. But they are useful tools when pushing for their broader agendas. And that's what's happening, folks. Let's see here. This is from... I'll just do a couple more questions and we'll go into some more stories. This is from Helena Lewis. He said, question, my employer implemented unconscious bias training this year, which basically said we have some bias and explained how to recognize it. Not sure, but is that a kind of CRT, critical race theory? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Any kind of unconscious bias training, any kind of system that teaches you that you're wrong in some way because of your race or ethnic background or your life choices, anything that tries to discriminate against you does fall within the boundaries of this. The important thing to follow, folks, is, again, if you have been discriminated against based on your race, based on your ethnic background, if you have been discriminated against or segregated, if there have been policies that segregate you or discriminated against you, that pointed to you or pointed the people taking the class, and you're told that white people are the problem or white people are oppressors, you may have been discriminated against, and you might have the ability to sue them for it. This is an important thing to note. Again, under the Civil Rights Act and the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, you have that right. This is from last question. Then we'll go into some stories. This is from Matt House. You said, "Hey, Josh, do you think we will ever find out the truth about January 6th? The people breaking the windows were the FBI and Antifa. They bust in. Most of the people that went in first were Antifa." Well, there definitely were people with Antifa there, including on the front lines. We've seen, for example, individuals like John Sullivan, who was a BLM activist and by his own admission had Antifa ties. You've seen other individuals who looked very Antifa-like at the front lines of all of this. There was obvious coordination among some individuals. People were breaking into the building even before Trump was finished giving his speech. Trump ironically told people to peacefully go there, and Twitter ironically deleted both of his tweets telling people to go home. And so when Trump tried cooling the situation, why did Twitter delete those tweets? That alone should be a huge issue to investigate. What was the reason Twitter deleted Trump's tweets telling people to protest peacefully and to go home? Why would they delete that if they actually were afraid? If they were concerned for their safety, why would they not want Trump supporters, seeing that their president at the time told them to go home peacefully and to stop doing what they were doing? Why would they try to delete that? That's the million-dollar question, folks. Now, will we ever get the truth on this? Not unless there's the whistleblower, I'd say. I seriously doubt the commission that's been formed will actually give us information on this. There's a few problems with that commission. Fine. I think it should be investigated. I'm all for investigating it. Frankly, I hope it gets investigated. I hope that Twitter gets investigated. I hope Twitter's reasoning for deleting Trump's tweets on why they deleted his calls telling people to go home and to be peaceful. Why would Twitter do that? I think Twitter should be investigated on why they censored that. Why would they do that, right? That should be investigated. The officer who shot Ashley Babbitt should be investigated for improper use of force. The officers who were standing right next to her when she was shot, which means that it was unnecessary for him to use violence to kill her, should be investigated. The individuals who spread the rumors that Officer Sicknick, who died of a heart attack, it turns out, that the disinformation was spread by just about every major news outlet claiming Trump supporters killed him, I believe they should all be investigated on how that false narrative, that disinformation narrative got out, and how public officials used disinformation to impeach a sitting president. I think all this should be investigated. Now, will the investigation cover this? Probably not, because the aggrieved party, and a very partisan party, because it's party politics, is launching the investigation. You're not going to get a real investigation. The chances of getting a real investigation are very slim. And the problem you have with that as well, folks, is that, this is how mafias work. This is how the mafia operates. The mafia, organized crime, will oftentimes have their legitimate and illegitimate branches. Keep in mind, one of my jobs since 2008 to 2012, I was investigating the Chinese mafia, and how it relates to the Chinese Communist Party's United Front. In fact, a lot of my early investigative reports were on this. I know how mafias operate. The Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department was working with the Tongs, one of them being the Fujian American Association, under which operates the Fuqing Gang, human traffickers, drug traffickers, extortionists, murderers, enslavers, who operate fairly openly in the United States and in New York. And what were they doing? These same organizations that were carrying out the crimes on the ground were running, with many public officials involved who were tied to them, the Police Advisory Board. How is it that the police were getting their advice on what to investigate and what not to investigate by people tied to these organized crime groups? That's how mafias work. And what happens when the aggrieved party, a government branch in this case, is the one launching the investigation into the thing that they themselves had some involvement in? you're not going to get a real investigation. This is how these things work. All right, folks, I can go on forever with this stuff. I want to go into some more stories, but first, I mentioned we've released now America Rewritten, this documentary we've recently finished. We're going to have a lot more, folks. We have this Defending America initiative now through the Epoch Times, which is going to be doing a lot of stuff like this: events, documentaries, special features, you name it, contests, great stuff happening on the website. But again, we've now released the first documentary, at least under this topic, which is America Rewritten, written by me. I hope you really enjoy it. I'll show you a quick trailer of what's happening right now. It's available now on epochtv.com/crossroads. I'll show you right now. All right, folks, again, America Rewritten. You can watch it now. It's on Epoch TV. Go to epochtv.com, epochtv.com/crossroads. The whole thing's online. I think it's like 46 minutes, roughly. I think you'll really like it. We go into a lot of revisionist history of the United States and debunk a lot of things that have been said about the United States. We also show a lot about what a democracy is, what a representative democracy is, and especially, folks, what a constitutional republic is, the type of government we have and why the founding fathers chose that. We are not a democracy. Hopefully, we never will be. And there's been a lot of false narratives spread about this country, about its history, about different individuals, and we explore all of these issues in that documentary. So please check it out. I think you'll very much enjoy it. We do have the link to that in the description below. And again, that's Epoch TV, epochtv.com/crossroads. Check it out. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do enjoy it, please spread it far and wide, because it's pretty much only going to get grassroots support in terms of being able to spread. So if anyone sees it, it's because of you folks helping us get it out there. So please do help us get the word out. Please do help us spread it. All right, folks, that said, I want to go into a few more stories. I want to talk about what's happening with the vaccines and these new virus variants, because it seems that the virus variants are getting around the vaccines in some cases. We'll talk about a couple examples of this. There's two variants now, the Lambda variant and the Delta variant, both of which seem to be getting around the vaccines, folks. Now, first off, Epoch Times reports, Lambda variant's unusual mutations may make it resistant to vaccines, according to researchers. It says scientists are concerned that a newly labeled COVID-19 variant first detected in Peru may be resistant to COVID-19 vaccines due to unusual mutations. Researchers from the University of Chile in Santiago said in a study published in a preprint last week that the variant has a considerable potential to become a variant of concern. They say, our data show for the first time that mutations present in the spike protein of the Lambda variant confer escape to neutralizing antibodies and increased infectivity. What we've been warning about, folks. Why I told you I have no plans to get vaccinated, at least until maybe it's FDA approved. I don't know. Because, folks, if you do a coronavirus vaccine wrong, it can use the antibodies to become more powerful. It's why it's so hard for vaccine doctors to make vaccines for coronaviruses. It's very, very hard to do. And if you do it wrong, you're going to kill a lot of people. You're going to kill people by doing it wrong. Because, again, if you do it wrong, the virus can use the antibodies to become more powerful. And that's what they're warning about right now with this new variant, the Lambda variant. And they wrote this in a paper that's yet to be peer-reviewed, so take it for what it's worth. Now, it says the Lambda variant, also known as C.37, is believed to have first emerged in Peru in August last year, but has only been recognized as a potential global threat in recent weeks, with the World Health Organization declaring declaring it a variant of interest on June 17th after it appeared in several countries simultaneously. The WHO said the variant's neutralizing antibodies could increase its transmissibility or potentially increase its resistance. It was associated with the substantive rates of community transmission in multiple countries, it said. In Peru, the Lambda variant strain now accounts for 82% of new infections. And meanwhile, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico have all confirmed widespread cases of the variant. And folks, where is the migrant crisis originating in the United States? Just so happens these countries, as public officials in the U.S. promised them free health care. California now is offering free health care to illegal immigrants in countries where you now have the predominant variant of the virus, the Lambda variant. And so anybody in those countries, in Mexico or elsewhere, who has been infected with this variant that may be a significant threat, they now have a very strong reason to illegally come to the United States because California gives them free health care. And so you can expect, very likely, this variant to come to a community near you, thanks to these policies. Not to say it might not have come here anyways. Now, folks, this is, of course, according to a scientific study. This is science. Has not yet been peer-reviewed, but as they say, right, trust the science. And so if someone accuses you of not trusting the science or whatever, or if someone accuses you of being vaccine cautious, whatever the keyword they use for it now, just tell them that you're trusting the science, because it seems to be the case that the science is warning about it. Now, on this note, there's other issues as well. In Israel, I mentioned something happening. Let's talk about it. In Israel, the Pfizer vaccine, the efficacy, its efficacy against COVID-19 infection has dropped now to 64%, according to the Israeli Health Ministry, meaning 64% of the people who got the Pfizer vaccine, it appears to not actually be working in Israel. It says, the ability of the Pfizer BioNTech mRNA vaccine to prevent infections and prevent symptomatic COVID-19 has dropped to 64%. The Israeli government announced late Monday. There was also a smaller drop in the vaccine efficacy in prevailing hospitalizations and more serious illness. The decline in efficacy was observed amid the spread of the Delta variant of the CCP virus in the country. In particular, the efficacy rate of the Pfizer vaccine against infection and symptomatic cases was 94.5% between May 2nd and June 5th. In other words, it used to work, but dropped to 64% from June 6th to early July. And again, folks, this is what happens when you try to create vaccines quickly on a virus that is still in the process of mutating. Now, online Israeli outlet Y News reported this, citing figures from the health ministry. The vaccine's efficacy in preventing hospitalizations and serious illness fell as well, from 98.2% between May 2nd and June 5th, down to 93% from June 6th to July 3rd, the outlet reported. So they are claiming that it still protects you from the more serious effects of the disease, depending on where you're at. It appears maybe the opposite with the Lambda variant, but with the Delta variant, that's what they're saying. Any person who came into contact with someone who has tested positive for the CCP virus, including those who have been vaccinated, should get tested, the ministry said. And the Epoch Times reached out to Pfizer for comment. They have not yet replied on that. And folks, what else has happened? Well, if you want to trust the science, it's hard these days because some of the scientists are being deplatformed. The scientists are not allowed to speak. How do you trust the science, quote unquote, when scientists are being kicked off of platforms for telling you information? One of the individuals was one of the inventors of the mRNA vaccine, not someone who is anti-vaccine by any means. Deplatformed by LinkedIn for giving scientific information. But LinkedIn now has reinstated his account. Let's go into it. Now, his problem, they say, was he questioned the vaccine benefit for children with the one that he actually helped create, this type of vaccine at least. It says here, LinkedIn has reinstated the account of mRNA vaccine technology inventor Dr. Robert Malone, who said his page was deleted last week after he made comments about mRNA COVID-19 vaccines and questioned whether they're appropriate to give to certain groups of people. In a Twitter post on Monday evening, Malone said he'd received a very kind and personal note from a senior executive on LinkedIn and shared with permission an anonymized version of the message, meaning he removed the individual's name. Now, the note says, Dr. Malone's account has been fixed as of this morning. I'd like to apologize on behalf of LinkedIn. We're just not good enough at detangling complicated, subtle scientific claims concurrent with similar but different misinformation coming from others. Malone said he's truly grateful for his kind gesture. Now, one of the issues we've been having is that things labeled as disinformation have oftentimes proven to be true several months or even years later. When you have the ability to have open discussions, when you have the ability to have scientific debate stripped from you, what happens, folks? Well, it means you're not really engaging in science at that point. You're engaging in dogmatic practices that say whatever the original prevailing narrative presented by government or media organizations, whatever one they decide to present, becomes the undeniable fact and nobody's allowed to question it. That's the way they're going with this. To the extent that even one of the inventors of the mRNA vaccine was actually deplatformed by by LinkedIn for talking about this. Now, there was a huge backlash against LinkedIn based on that. And it was only after that backlash that LinkedIn changed their narrative around and said, oops, accident, sorry guys, didn't mean to do that. As if they claimed that maybe they didn't know that he was one of the creators of the mRNA vaccine, which does bring into question as well why it took him so long to reinstate his page. That said, folks, it's getting late, so call it a night. But again, every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, I'll be doing these lives. If you're in the New York area, we're going to be holding events based around, again, this new Defending America initiative that Epoch Times has launched. So keep an eye out for those. We're going to be announcing them on our website. If you're in New York or one of the surrounding areas, please join us, folks. We have several events planned. We're announcing them one by one. You can find them announced on the website. And also, folks, please check out the documentary I made. I think you'll really like it. Written and hosted by me, and we have some great people on there. Dinesh D'Souza, Victor Davis Hanson, some great folks, very deep information, and a lot of information that maybe a lot of people don't know about these days, especially I'd say information that's becoming increasingly important to know. So please check it out. That's America. That's America Rewritten. And you can find it on Epoch TV, epochtv.com/crossroads. That said, folks, again, always appreciate you all. Always enjoy doing these. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. The American story was once seen as a light of strength and freedom for the world. It created a government by the people and for the people, where rights were given not by leaders, but by God. Yet now the very fabric of the nation is under assault. What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost?